Hey, what's up? This is Jason Hamburg. This is my 2020 YZ250X. I'm going to go over what I've done to the bike. I'm going to try and keep it pretty brief, but it'll just give you a little bit of an idea of what I've done, why I chose to set it up the way that I have. And yeah, if you want to see kind of any more specific stuff, let me know, and I'll definitely kind of make some more of these to fill you in. For starters, I run the Fast Company Flex bars. I've had these on my bike for about 3 years now. And man, I love them a lot. Like for fatigue, arm pump, I have a wrist injury from a few years back that they really help with as far as kind of avoiding my wrist being super sore. I run Torque One lock-on grips. I feel like they last a long time. They're really sticky when they're first new, and lock-on is rad. Zeta unbreakable levers. I also run a Zeta easy pull clutch perch. Makes life easier in that technical terrain. It's just less fatiguing because it pulls really easy. I get a lot of questions about these handguards. These are the Cycra Rebound handguards. They're really expensive, but they last like crazy well. The only bummer about them is there's a spring in here that actually creates the rebound, and that does tend to break after a couple crashes. And you can't buy the spring. You can buy replacement parts for everything else, but the spring is not available. So usually I'll just tighten them up and they don't spring back, but it's not a huge deal. I get questions about why I run flags and not wraparounds. I just find that the flags protect me for what I need, and I've ran wraparounds in the past. They kind of scare me a little bit. Like, I know people who have broken hands and wrists by their hands kind of falling through. But then also, I just don't like that if you kind of even just nick a tree, the bike really snaps. Like, your handlebars really snap. It's really impacted. Like, I can hit something pretty hard here. It'll deflect off, but it doesn't necessarily like throw me into anything crazy, like head shake wise. So that's why I run flags. And yeah, these flags I think work really well. As far as suspension is concerned, this is not stock suspension. It's still the KYB SSS stuff, but it's revalved and it has stiffer springs. I'm about 190 pounds without gear, so whatever that is with gear. And yeah, the revalve kind of allows me to run basically my compression as soft as it'll go for my hard enduro stuff. Moto, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, and then if I'm kind of hitting big jumps, that sort of thing, I will crank the compression just right up. I run my forks about 3.5 millimeters from the top of the clamp to the top of the main tube. And I just find it's a good mix for kind of the riding I do. I'm running an IMS tank. This tank has been with me now for 2 bikes. I had it on my old YZ. Yeah, it's a big tank. I think it's like 15 liters or something like that, like over 3 gallons. Honestly, I don't notice it anymore. Maybe notice it for the first ride or 2. But I can have this thing filled right up, and I do tend to fill it all the way to the top every time and just get used to riding like that. And it's nice to be able to ride for a long time, and it's nice that it's clear. It's ugly as hell, but you can see how much fuel you have, which is awesome. I currently have a set of D-Vol rad guards and braces on my bike. I actually started with a set of Enduro engineering braces, and they were trash. They were super crappy, and they cracked in a number of different spots, and Enduro engineering was not good to deal with. I usually try not to bag on companies, but usually companies are good to deal with and try and have good customer service, and those guys definitely don't. So I have these D-Vol ones on. So far they're pretty good. Like, I'm not in love with them by any means. They have a couple little weird things as far as mounting or just the way that they have some things set up, but they're not breaking, and my rads are in good shape. So I like that it's kind of an incorporated guard / brace. And yeah, for the type of stuff that I do, you can't ask for the world. I understand that, but I think these braces do work quite well. This is a gripper seat that I got through Guts Racing. These ribs are awesome for like moto, kind of holding you on the seat, but then also some of those real slow speed kind of uphills where your feet are off the pegs and you're kind of just like paddling along. These ribs actually do a lot to keep you on the bike. I have the FMF gnarly pipe on with a stock silencer. I wanted to try the gnarly just by itself before going to a silencer. I think maybe you know, next year if I run into a problem where this silencer gets beat up and I need to replace it, I might do that with an FMF full system. But as far as right now, this gnarly is pretty good for adding more bottom end grunt. I definitely did notice it putting it on. It does tend to sign off a little bit in the higher RPMs. So I think if you're riding more like Hare and Hound style or moto, maybe you'd want to look at something like a Fatty or a Pro Circuit or something like that. But if you're doing like hard enduro, tight technical stuff, the gnarly definitely helps. Additionally to that, I have an Apex Technical Innovations head on the bike. Check out my other videos that kind of talk in more detail about that. I'm running the XC dome. You can run 3 different types of domes, the SX, MX, and XC. And I just found that for what I'm doing, the XC kind of makes the most linear power and works the best for what I need. If you have a YZ250, a YZ250X, I would say that's one of the first things that you could look at doing. It's pretty inexpensive and you definitely do notice it. I also have a set of V-Force reeds on the bike. That was actually one of the first things that I did to my 2017 bike, was put on a set of V-Force reeds, and I just brought them over when I got this new bike. They're awesome. Yeah, and then the only real other thing that I've done to the engine itself is I have done the power valve mod, the power governor mod, the governor mod, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to get into detail about what it is. Google it. But when these YZ250Xs come off the factory floor, there's a slight hesitation kind of right before the bike goes from low range to mid range, and then the mid range hits and like rips your arms out of the sockets. If you're riding technical terrain, you'll notice it. If you're not, you probably won't notice it, but if you have noticed a little bit of a hesitation, check out the power governor mod or the power valve mod or whatever, and yeah, it helps for sure. I just run a stock clutch, but I'll probably end up switching over to a Recluse clutch, not the auto clutch, but the manual drive, probably the torque drive clutch and basket next year. Next time I need to replace my clutch, I'll end up going with that, just because I think the baskets themselves are built a little stronger and might last a little bit longer. I also run a heavy flywheel weight. I need to check the box to confirm which size it is. It's made by GYTR, but you'll definitely notice a heavier flywheel on these bikes. Just tends to stall a little bit less. I don't really notice it impacting power. I don't know, that's just my honest opinion. I don't really notice the power impacts. I just notice the fact that it doesn't stall as easy. And once you learn how to build energy in the flywheel, you can use that energy to get up over things a little bit easier. And having that heavier flywheel allows me to do that better. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much everything I've done to the engine. Like I said, it's the most I've ever done. I don't have any like headwork or porting or polish or whatever they do. It is just all bolt-on parts, but the bike rips now, man. Like, with all the stuff that I've done, if I compare it to the stock engine, like the things that I'm able to do with it are, you know, definitely really conducive to the type of riding that I'm excited about, which is like the hard enduro technical stuff. I run Fastway ankle saver foot pegs, and I run them in the 10mm lower and back position. I just find I'm a little bit taller of a person. I'm about 6'2" or like 188 centimeters, I think that is roughly. And these foot pegs do really well to kind of just lower me, bring me back a little bit, and just open up the cockpit a little bit for me. I think it's more beneficial to bring your center of gravity down than to, say, bring in like high-rise handlebars or ape hangers, something like that. So I run the ankle savers. They're also just nice from a fact that I don't jump as much as I used to, so it's nice to have that little bit of extra protection if I come up short or overshoot a jump, just to know my ankles aren't gonna explode out of the top of my legs. I run an SXS skid plate with linkage protection all built into one. They're expensive, but they do offer a ton of protection, both obviously to your frame rails, to your engine, to your linkage, but they also just make life easier as far as like sliding over things and that sort of stuff. It's really easy to mount, take on and off, and I can change my oil without pulling it off. So that's really handy. I think these bikes, they come stock with a 1450 gear ratio. That is too high for me in the type of stuff that I do. So originally I went to a 1350, which is good. I think it's about the equivalent of going up in the rear 2 or 3 to go down 1 in the front. So at 1350, the bike worked really well. I needed to replace all my stuff, and I decided to go to a 1351, so even further lowering the bike down. And yeah, it works really, really well now. Can kind of pull like second gear, third gear sometimes in stuff where I used to be in first and second, and that just goes a long way to reduce wheel spin and kind of give you more grunt and traction. So I just run like cheapo Sunstar sprockets, steel sprockets. They last a long time and they do what I need them to do. And then I always run an O-ring chain because I don't like constantly adjusting my chain and that sort of thing. So yeah, and then finally, tires and wheels. It's been nice coming from a YZ250 to a 250X because with the 18-inch rear wheel, I actually do notice that quite a lot in the higher speed stuff when you kind of have a log that's not huge and it kind of allows you to carry speed over it. Having that little bit extra sidewall definitely does help. I run Midas C19 in the front, and currently I have a Midas XT754 in the rear. The type of terrain that we ride where I'm from is usually soft sand, loam, lots of roots and not a ton of rock. And this XT754 is really rad for that. It's got like nice big tall lugs and it really chews hard. I think if I was riding more hard pack stuff or faster flowy stuff, tires with shorter knobs definitely work better. But this 754 with the taller knobs works really good for the majority of what I ride. I also run a tubeless front and rear. Again, I don't have a lot of rock where I'm from, and I ride such a range of types of riding. Depending on where I'm going, I can throw in different PSI and my bike just works better. On average, I actually tend to run the front pretty much between, I would say, 10 to 14 PSI, but probably somewhere around 12 PSI almost all the time. I don't like when I can feel my front tire rolling, like on the sidewall. And then in the rear, I'll run everything from like 4 to 6 PSI for technical stuff. But then when I'm gonna ride moto or faster speed, harder pack stuff, maybe I'll go up to like 10 to 12 PSI. So that's what that tubeless system allows me to do. Yeah, I think if I rode somewhere more rocky, maybe I'd entertain the idea of using moose, especially in the rear. But I don't need to do that. So I'll run what works best, which for me is tubeless. I'm not super picky when it comes to brake pads, either OEM or like something from Braking or SBS or wherever. One thing that I do with my brakes though is I switch out my .4 to a .5.1. The 5.1 has a higher boiling temperature and it just does fade less. I definitely notice brake fade with the .4, but the 5.1 for me kind of alleviates that. As far as other fluids are concerned, I just run pump gas and then I run AMSOIL Dominator at 40:1. And then in my transmission, I just run a Petro-Canada Dextron 6 ATF. I've ran ATF in 2-strokes since back in the day when my dad was putting them in my 80s. And yeah, again, my clutches last a really long time. I switch my oil out probably every, I would say 6 to 10 hours, probably around 8 hours is typically when I would switch it out. And I just keep track of those hours through an hour meter, which is mounted, actually cut into my bar pad up here. I don't run a fan on my bike. The stator doesn't have enough power to run a fan, but I do run the Evans waterless coolant. I made that switch at the start of this year and it works really, really well. I ran through 4 liters of 50/50 antifreeze within the first like month of having this bike. I switched to the Evans stuff and it's like maybe a liter and a bit of a little jug and I've had it all season. I think it just has a higher boiling temperature, so yeah, your bike still gets hot, But the nice thing is with regular antifreeze, your bike gets hot, loses coolant, and then just gets more hot. Whereas having that Evans in there, at least it's always in there protecting the bike.